On a single page of newsprint, dated the 18th of March, 1910, a small-town Idaho weekly called the Rathdrum Tribune printed 4 words as a headline: "Giant skeleton found." Underneath them is an account of a cave in the lava country near Shoshone, and of a human skeleton said to measure 10 feet from end to end. The column is short, it is confident, and it does not end the way you would expect a story like that to end. It ends with a destination. The bones, the paper says, will be taken out, and they will be forwarded to the Smithsonian Institute. That sentence is the reason we are here. Not the giant, not the cave, not the 10 feet, the sentence. Because that promise is the last thing anyone is recorded as saying about those bones. There is no receipt on the other end, no accession number, no catalog line, no name of anyone who opened a crate in Washington and wrote down what was inside it. A weekly paper in Idaho points at a national institution, and then the trail stops on the page where it started. A missing record is not a hidden record. Everyone who has ever chased this story has had to stand at that line, and most of them have stepped straight over it. We are going to walk it instead, from the printed page outward, as far as the documents will carry us, all the way to the end. Because the documents do go somewhere, and it is not where anyone expects. Look at the page itself first, because it matters enormously what is actually on it, and almost nobody who repeats this story has ever gone and looked. It is one sheet, scanned and put online by the Library of Congress through its newspaper digitization program, which is the only reason we can read it at all. Narrow columns, small type, the kind of page where a skeleton 10 feet long sits a few inches from advertisements and county notices, set in the same size, given the same weight. Read down the column. You find a claim of discovery in a cave, you find a stated measurement, and then you find something that changes what this page is. Part of the account is not the Tribune's own. It is handed on, credited to another paper, the Inland Herald, which means the Rathdrum Tribune did not see a cave, did not see a skeleton, and did not measure anything. It read about it. So the page that every retelling of this story ultimately rests on is not the origin of the claim. It is a relay. That matters more than it sounds. Every time a report like this is picked up and reprinted, it gets shorter, and what falls out first is always the part that could have been checked. The name of the man who was there, the condition of the bones, the qualifier the first writer put in to cover himself. What survives the trip is the number and the destination. Because the number and the destination are the reason it was worth reprinting at all. We are not looking at a witness statement that lost its follow-up. We are looking at a copy of something, at least one removed from whoever first told it, and we do not have the original. And what you do not find anywhere on the page is a single person standing behind it. No excavator is named, no physician, no anatomist, no county official, nobody who could have been written to. Nothing about how 10 feet was arrived at, or with what, or by whom. No description of the bones beyond their supposed scale. No condition, no completeness, no note of what a skull or a femur actually looked like. There is no follow-up item in the weeks that come after. And then, near the bottom, the prose changes tense. It stops describing what was done and starts describing what will be done. The bones will be taken out. They will be forwarded. Keep that shift in mind, because it is the hinge of this entire case. A future tense is a promise. Somebody, at some point, was supposed to come back and turn it into a past tense. Was taken out, was forwarded, was received, was examined. Nobody ever did. Now, the obvious objection is that this is just a small paper printing a tall tale, and tall tales do not need archives. It is a fair objection. American papers in that decade ran finds like this constantly, in the same register they used for prize livestock and lost hunters, but the destination on that page is not fanciful. And this is where the story gets heavier rather than lighter. The Smithsonian, by its own published account, really was in the business of receiving human remains. It has held them since 1846. Most of what it holds was acquired in the 19th and early 20th centuries, through excavations, through transfers from other parts of the federal government, and through donations from private individuals. Bones arrived at that institution in boxes from all over the country in exactly the era when this page was printed. A man in Idaho writing that a skeleton would be forwarded to Washington was not describing something absurd. He was describing a routine, and the machinery on the receiving end was not casual. Between 1881 and 1889, the Smithsonian ran a division of mound exploration, and what survives of it is not a rumor. It is a record group, field notes, reports, drawings, correspondence, held today in the National Anthropological Archives under a manuscript number you can cite. That work produced a published report in 1894, hundreds of pages, issued through the Bureau of Ethnology's 12th annual volume under the name of Cyrus Thomas. These people wrote things down. They wrote down where they dug, what they lifted out, what they measured, and who they sent it to. Paper was the point. An institution that spent 9 years building a documentary apparatus around American burial mounds was not a place where objects went to become anonymous, which is precisely what makes one silent case conspicuous. An institution indifferent to paperwork would explain nothing. Of course, a shipment would vanish. An institution this meticulous, in the middle of a decades-long campaign to document what came out of American ground, raises the sharper question. If a 10-foot skeleton was packed in Idaho and shipped to Washington in 1910, where in that apparatus does it appear? It does not appear anywhere. No shipping note tied to that report, no accession entry, no curator's letter acknowledging receipt, no specimen record, no measurement, no examination, no photograph, no chain of custody running from a cave near Shoshone to a shelf anywhere in the United States. This is the point where honest work and comfortable work go in different directions. What has just been described is a limit in what has been found. It is not, by itself, evidence that anything was concealed. Records fail for dull reasons: a claim never checked, a letter never written, a shipment never made, a box mislabeled, a file lost to a century of moves and reorganizations. A gap is a gap. It is not a fingerprint, but it is also not nothing. And the discomfort of standing in a gap this specific, a named paper, a printed date, a stated destination, a national institution that genuinely was receiving bones, and then nothing at all, is the exact discomfort this story has been living on for 116 years. If you think histories like this should not be left half-finished on a shelf, subscribe and leave a like. It helps us keep pulling these pages back out of the record. So let us do the thing the internet almost never does with this case and take the dark reading seriously. Suppose something did arrive. Suppose a crate came in from Idaho in 1910 with something inside it that did not fit the picture the Bureau's own scientists were assembling of who had lived on this continent and how long they had been here. Ask who would have handled it. Somebody catalogs. Somebody decides which finds go into a bulletin and which go into a drawer with a number on it. Somebody writes the public summary, and somebody else keeps the correspondence file that the public summary was written from. Institutions do have interests, prestige, funding, jurisdiction, the coherence of the story they have staked their reputation on. That is not paranoia. That is how organizations behave. And when an organization with those interests is also the only party holding the paperwork, a missing page stops feeling neutral. I want to be honest about how far that reasoning can go. An incentive is not a motive, and a motive is not an act. Nothing in the surviving paperwork shows anyone at the Smithsonian deciding anything at all about a shipment from Shoshone, because nothing in the surviving paperwork shows a shipment from Shoshone. The dark reading is built entirely on the shape of the gap, not on its contents. Now, the strongest ordinary explanation, stated with the same specificity, because it deserves that much. The 1910 item may simply be an unverified report, a rumor set in type, a relay of a relay, a mistake about what was lying on a cave floor, a local exaggeration of the kind that circulated freely in a decade when American papers ran finds like this as filler. The bones may never have been lifted, the crate may never have been packed, the promise may have been made by someone with no intention or no means of keeping it, and nobody in Shoshone or Rathdrum ever thought about it again after that week's issue went out. Both readings are standing. They cannot both survive contact with the record, and the version most people arrive with turns out to be the easier of the two to trace because it has a date of birth. On the 3rd of December 2014, a website called World News Daily Report published a story announcing that the Smithsonian had admitted destroying thousands of giant human skeletons in the early 1900s. It had everything the 1910 page lacked, and it had it in abundance. A court case, a scientific organization with an official-sounding name pressing for disclosure, a whistleblower, numbers, thousands of them, and even a date on the future. The documents, it said, would be released the following year, in 2015. Look at that list again, because it is a lesson in what evidence looks like from a distance. Named institutions, legal process, an insider, a quantity, a deadline. Every one of those is a thing a real document has, and every one of them, in this case, is where the story comes apart the moment anyone touches it. The Smithsonian's own published account of its most persistent myths, updated in August of 2024, identifies that story as the product of an online satirical newspaper. It states that the organization named in it never existed. It states that no such case was ever brought before the Supreme Court. Independent fact-checking in 2022 went looking for a court order behind the claim, found none, found no news record of any such proceeding, and reported the institution's flat rejection of the whole account. And the release scheduled for 2015 never happened. It was not delayed. It was not suppressed. It was part of the fiction from the first paragraph, a promise written by somebody who knew there was nothing to hand over. That accounts for the modern story. It does not account for 1910, and this is where the case turns. Because the answer has been sitting in plain print the entire time, published by the very institution the bones were promised to, in the very same year. In 1910, the Bureau of American Ethnology issued Bulletin 37, a report on antiquities in central and southeastern Missouri, written by Gerard Folk. It is not a famous document. It is a working survey, mounds, trenches, measurements, the ordinary output of a field season. On page 44, beneath a description of an extended skeleton, there is a footnote. And in that footnote, Folk does two things. First, he warns that skeletal measurements of this kind are approximate. The figures, he says, should not be read as precise, which is a scientist telling you, in 1910, that a number like 10 feet taken off a disturbed cave floor by somebody with no training and no instrument named is not a measurement at all. And then he states, without hedging, that the popular notion that the mound builders and the indigenous peoples of the Mississippi Valley were giants is entirely without foundation. The skeletons, he writes, indicate people no larger than those who came after them. Put the two 1910 documents side by side. In March, a weekly in Idaho promises that a 10-foot skeleton will be sent to the Smithsonian. That same year, in the Smithsonian's own scientific series, a man employed by the institution those bones were promised to puts it in print that the giant idea has no foundation. and that measurements exactly like the one in that headline cannot be trusted. The institution accused of swallowing the answer had already published it, in the open, under its own imprint, before the promise it supposedly swallowed was ever kept. So the silence at the center of this case was never silence. It was a footnote nobody opened. The missing document that people have been hunting for a century was never buried. As far as the record shows, it was never written, because nothing was ever brought in to write it about. And the one page that did address the question was too small, too dry, and too early to compete with 4 words in a headline. That is the mechanism worth taking away from here. A promise to check something can outlive the checking. A sentence left in the future tense, with nobody assigned to close it, does not stay open and honest forever. It hardens, and sooner or later, somebody who was not there will finish it for you, and their ending will travel further than the correction, because their ending is better written. And it is worth being exact about why this particular ending travels so well, because the reason is not stupidity, and it is not gullibility. A cover-up is a more comfortable story than a mistake. A cover-up means somebody knows. It means the record is complete somewhere, in a room, in a drawer, in a file held by people who are keeping it from you. That is infuriating. But it is not frightening, because it means the answer exists. What the 1910 page actually offers is worse. It offers the possibility that nobody knows, that nobody ever knew, that a claim was made in a small town, printed, repeated, and then simply left where it fell, and that there is no answer anywhere, in any drawer, because no one ever went and made one. People do not invent conspiracies to explain villains. They invent them to avoid explaining indifference. And that same indifference has a second bill, one that has never needed a conspiracy to be disturbing. Ancestral remains of native peoples really were taken out of American ground in this era and carried into federal collections, often without consent and often without anything a descendant community today would recognize as a record of who a person was or where they had been laid. The Smithsonian's own collections pages describe how those remains came in, and acknowledge that many of the practices behind them are not acceptable by any standard the institution would apply now. They also describe the work underway, establishing provenance where the old paperwork is thin or missing, consulting with descendant communities, and returning ancestral remains to the nations they belong to. That work is slow, for a reason worth sitting with. The same casual record-keeping that leaves us unable to say what happened in Idaho in 1910 leaves real families unable to say, with certainty, whose ancestors are in which drawer. Those nations are here. They are not a chapter that closed in the 19th century. They have historians, and offices, and claims in progress, and the remains of their ancestors are what is actually at stake in how freely this country once shipped bones to Washington. That is the story with names in it, and it has been standing behind the other one the entire time, out of the frame, because the headline in front of it was better. So we come back to the page, and to what can honestly be said about it now. No verified skeleton, no verified shipment, no located accession record, no evidence of concealment or destruction of anything, and no evidence that anyone, at any point, ever went and checked. The column still ends the way it ended on the 18th of March, 1910, in the tense it was set in. The bones will be taken out. They will be forwarded. It never became was. It never had to. Somebody else was always willing to finish the sentence. If you want to keep following pages like this one, subscribe, and we will go to the next.